The bottle was clear, and I was thirsty, and those two facts were the whole of my thinking. It was the end of a long afternoon outside. That particular kind of thirst where your mouth has gone slightly stupid, and every thought in your head has narrowed down into one thought. There was a table by the door with things on it, bags, keys, somebody's jumper, and among them a plastic bottle, 2/3 full, clear as glass, standing exactly where a bottle of water stands. I picked it up. I remember the weight being about right. I remember turning the cap, that small resistance, and then the give, the little crack of the seal. And then my hand stopped, not slowed, stopped. The bottle already up near my chest, the cap loose between my finger and my thumb, my arm holding still in the air as though it had been asked a question I hadn't heard. What came out of that bottle was not water. It came out fast and heavy and sharp. Spirit, strong, clear grain spirit, the kind that fills a room the moment the lid is off. It went up the back of my nose and into my eyes. I want to be accurate about the order here, because the order turns out to be the whole thing. The hand stopped first. The bottle came down. My arm went back to my side. Somewhere in there, my face did something, and I heard myself make a small sound. And then, after all of that, after the movement was already finished and the bottle was already back on the table, the sentence arrived, fully formed. Slightly late. That isn't water. For a long time I told that as a story about myself. I told it the way you tell a piece of good luck that you'd quite like to be credited for. Quick reflexes, good instincts. That was my line. People laughed in the right place, and I never once looked at it any closer. When I do look at it closely, there's a gap in the middle of it that I can't fill. If you asked me to point at the moment I decided not to drink, I couldn't. There's no decision in there. A fast decision is still a decision. It has a shape. You can find the place where it sat, even if it only sat there for a quarter of a second. This one has no shape at all. There's a hand going up and a hand coming down, and me arriving afterwards to find the job already done and the bottle already back on the table. I wasn't quick. Whatever was quick, it wasn't the part of me that talks. The part of me that talks came in at the end, had a look round, and said the obvious thing. That isn't water. Thank you. We know. It's an odd thing to notice about yourself, that in the 1 second of that afternoon which actually mattered, the person I think of as me was still on his way. Mr. No had a cold last winter. The ordinary sort, the sort that goes round every classroom in January and comes home in a coat pocket. He was fine. He was mostly cross. He lay along the sofa with his feet on my leg and announced, in the flat voice of a boy who has been personally wronged by the universe, that his nose wasn't working. Then his face went, all at once, the way it does at that age. 1 second of proper misery, actual tears. I can't smell anything, he said. I told him I'd noticed something far worse. I told him my nose had gone red. Properly red, the red it goes in the cold, the red it goes when I've been laughing at something for too long, and that his was heading the same way, and that we now matched, and that this was, officially, a family trait. He stopped crying in order to look at my nose. Then he laughed at my nose. Then he wanted a mirror so he could check his own. It struck me later, carrying the mugs through, that this was the first conversation the two of us had ever had about noses. In all the years we've been talking to each other, neither of us had mentioned the thing in the middle of our faces. Not until the afternoon it stopped working. Here's what I had always assumed about the nose, without ever putting it into a sentence, that it was a recognition device. a small identification desk in the middle of the face. Something comes in, the desk checks it, the desk tells me what it is, and then I decide what to do about it. Coffee, rain, petrol, somebody's perfume on the stairs. That model is so ordinary that it took me a while to notice it was a model at all. The wiring doesn't look like that. Most of what you take in, what you see, what you hear, what your skin picks up, passes through a sorting station in the middle of the brain on its way to the parts that do the analyzing. It's a general arrangement. Signals come in, get routed, get handed on. The first line out of your nose isn't built that way. That station isn't on it. The route runs into the areas that deal with smell directly, and those areas sit very close in the plain anatomical sense, wired together, neighbors, to the parts of the brain involved in emotion and in memory. The station the rest of your senses go through has a name, by the way. It's the thalamus. It's in every textbook picture of the brain, and every sense but one has business there on the way in. Which leaves me with a small correction to make about the thing in the middle of my face. It isn't, first of all, an identification desk. Whatever it is, it's plugged in somewhere else. There's a second half to this that I'd never separated out either. Smelling something and knowing what it is are not one job. Putting a name to a smell, this is lemon, this is diesel, this is the inside of a school corridor, draws on more of the brain than that first line does. More areas working together, including the sorting station the incoming route doesn't use. Recognition is assembled out of more parts than the arrival is. That's as far as the wiring goes. And I want to leave it exactly there because it's very easy to reach for it as an explanation, and it isn't one. It describes a layout. It doesn't describe my afternoon. My afternoon is this, and it's only mine. I remember the bottle being lighter in my hand on the way down than it had been on the way up. I remember the cap between my fingers. I remember my arm stopping in the air, and the sound I made, and the table. Then I remember having the sentence. That's the order it happened in. I've turned it over a lot of times, and it doesn't rearrange itself. The two things sit side by side on a shelf in my head, what I now know about the wiring and what I remember about that room, and I've stopped trying to make either one of them account for the other. There's another one of these, and it's a good deal less flattering. Some rooms do something to me, newly finished ones mostly. A flat that's just been done up. An office where the skirting boards still look wet, that particular shine on everything. I walk in, and there's a fine, dry sting high up in my nose, and I want to be somewhere else. I go outside, it stops, nothing else happens. That's the entire event, and it has happened often enough that I stopped filing it under coincidence a long time ago. Here's the part I'd never looked at. Every single time, I have walked back out of that building with a reason already in my mouth. I know exactly what's in there, I've thought. I could name it for you. I have said it out loud to people, in the confident voice you use for things you're sure of. I have never checked, not once, not with anything, not with anyone, not in any way that would count as checking. I don't know what was in those rooms. I've never known. What I had was a nose stinging and a story. And the story arrived so quickly and so smoothly behind the sting that for years I never noticed they were two separate objects. The sting is real. I'm not doubting the sting. The sting is the most reliable thing in this whole account. It's the sentence after the sting that I have no evidence for at all. That isn't a comfortable place to stand, because it means the thing I'd been treating as information was never information. Something arrived. It arrived with no reason attached to it, and I supplied the reason myself, immediately, before anybody asked me for one. There's one more thing it does, and it's the thing that finally closed the case for me. Stay with a smell and it goes quiet. Not because it has gone. Sit in a room with something in the air, a cut orange, wet paint, the last of last night's cooking, and the strength of it drops away underneath you while you're sitting there. It's still in the room, and you're not really receiving it anymore. It has slid in behind everything else you're doing. That's the system working normally rather than failing. It keeps itself free for whatever turns up next, and what it gives up in exchange is everything that stays the same. Everybody knows the household version of this. You come home after a week away, open your own front door, and there's a smell in your own hallway that belongs to you, and that you have never once noticed while living inside it. I'm not going to dress that up as a proven fact. It's a thing people say, and a thing I've felt standing in my own doorway with a bag still in my hand. It does take part in ordinary vigilance, of course. Something burning in the kitchen, milk that's gone. It gets you to look up. But something that quietly steps back is a prompt, not a barrier, and I had been living as though it were a barrier. It doesn't hand out answers, and it doesn't stand at the window all night. That was roughly where I thought the matter closed. My grandparents' house is old, and there was a long stretch of years when I wasn't in it. When I finally went back, it was an afternoon in the middle of the week, and nothing about the arrival was ceremonial. There was the gate that has never once opened without dragging. There was the step down into the passage that everyone in the family has caught their foot on, and nobody has ever fixed. There was the door, with its handle worn pale in one spot, where a hand goes. I pushed it open, and I was 8. I want to be careful here, because this is easy to say the wrong way round. It wasn't that I remembered anything. Remembering is something you do. You go and fetch it. You turn it over. You put it back. This wasn't that. There was no going and fetching. The door opened, and I was already there. Small, in a coat that was too big on a tiled floor, in the particular grey light that comes into that passage in the afternoon, and has been coming into it for 50 years. The dresser, the tin on top of the dresser, the cold of the wall beside the door. And only afterwards, a second later, possibly 2, did the rest of me arrive and put a name to what was going on. This is what their house smells like. Of course it is. This is what their house has always smelled like. I've never been able to describe that smell to anybody. I can't tell you what's in it. I only know that I'd been carrying it about unopened for most of my life, and that it took less than a second to spend. The door opened. The boy was already standing in the passage. The man came in behind him and worked out what had happened. What happened at that door isn't rare. It happens to people. And where it puts them is slightly strange. When people are handed a smell and asked what comes back, the memories that turn up lean earlier in life than the ones brought back by other kinds of prompt. Show someone a photograph, give them a word, play them something, and what surfaces tends to sit further along. School, work, the years when you were busy becoming whoever you are now. Smell tips the other way. It's weighted more towards the early end, towards the years you were living in before you had any equipment for explaining them. That's a tendency, not a rule. Plenty of people open the door and get handed something else entirely. The other half of it is how the thing feels. That sense of being back there, actually back in the room, at the height you used to be, comes across more strongly with a smell than with the other prompts. And this is the part I have to be honest about, mostly with myself, because it's the part I'd most like to get wrong. Strength of feeling isn't accuracy. I have no way of knowing whether the light in that passage was really that grey, or whether the coat that was too big was that year's coat or a different year's. What I have is the force of the arrival, which is enormous, and the accuracy of the contents, which nobody can vouch for, and me least of all. It puts you back somewhere. It doesn't certify the place. We don't talk about it. That's the ordinary state of affairs. It sits in the middle of the face in every photograph ever taken of anybody, and it goes years at a time without being mentioned. Mr. No hasn't raised the subject since. Neither of us has looked at a nose on purpose since that afternoon on the sofa. I still don't know what was in those rooms. I still tell the bottle story, though I tell it differently now. I've stopped taking the credit for it. It's a worse story that way, and I find I don't mind. The thing that stays with me isn't any of that. It's the doorway. Sometime this year I'll go back to that house. The gate will drag. The handle will be worn pale in the same spot because that's where a hand goes. I'll push the door. And there will be a second before I've decided anything, before I've named anything, while I'm still standing on the step with my weight on the wrong foot. When an 8-year-old is already standing in the passage, in the grey light, waiting for the rest of me to catch up.